All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, thank you for coming. My name is John Brooker. I work with MUSC's Sustainability and Recycling Department, and you're here at Bridging the Ashley with our guests, Charleston Moves. Really briefly, before we begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about MUSC sustainability. We work on a variety of initiatives around campus. We work in recycling and waste management, energy and water, food, transportation, climate, and green building. And we also record all of these talks that we host on a monthly basis, and you can find these on our YouTube channel. And lastly, if you want to hear more about events like this or get involved in any of the programs that we do, we have a sign-up list at the front, and we also have, we can be reached on social media at MUSC Go Green, and that's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, which I just mentioned, and Yammer. And with that, I'm going to introduce Katie Zimmerman with Charleston Moves to come up and talk to us about the new bridge and Charleston Moves' vision for a connected Charleston.
Hi, how are y'all? It's this weather's kind of throwing me off, so I apologize. I'm in like a weird, it's too hot. My name is Katie Zimmerman. I'm Executive Director of Charleston Moves. And if you're not familiar with Charleston Moves, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization, and we advocate for walking and biking and public transit infrastructure throughout Charleston County. So what we don't do, we don't give bikes away to kids. We don't go after people for breaking the rules, all of that sort of stuff. So just to preface that, because I tend to get questions about that when I give presentations, and there are plenty of nonprofits out there that give bikes away to children and that also put information out there about the rules of the road and what you should or shouldn't be doing. And some of those things we sometimes disagree with depending on the context of the street. So we don't work on that stuff. We advocate solely for good policy and good infrastructure so that everybody has equitable access to our public spaces. A lot of the things that MUSC, your sustainability work revolves around, connects to multiple modes of transportation. So knowing that we cannot build our way out of traffic congestion, and knowing that designing streets and bridges and highways solely for the use of single occupancy motor vehicles will not solve a lot of our problems. When we look at utilizing other modes of transit, we know that there's a whole list of things that, you open up the newspaper every day, you see these problems that we're all debating, and transportation choice is absolutely at the heart of most, if not all, of those problems. So Charleston Moves was actually, I spent the first week of January going through our old files, and it was really interesting to see how far we've actually come. Charleston Moves used to be called Charleston Bicycle Advocacy Group, and it was all volunteer. And, the acronym isn't great for Charleston Bicycle Advocacy Group. It's not a really inspiring acronym. But it was a group of citizens that sort of would show up for public meetings and try to really have access to these discussions that policymakers were having about what infrastructure was going in. And this was in the mid to late 90s that these conversations were occurring. And then a huge opportunity arose with the new Cooper River Bridge and the fact that originally that was not designed for anything but cars to use, which would have been just an absolute, for generations, that would have been a major mistake if we didn't have bike and pedestrian access on that bridge. So CBAG rallied and, worked very hard, had a really successful campaign that they led. And if you go on South Carolina Department of Transportation's website now and see the end result, which is this great bikeped lane that's on the Ravenel Bridge, that would not have happened without this group of citizens working on this. And now DOT happily takes credit for this, even though the campaign itself was a real struggle to get the mayors to sign on. State legislators made fun of it. They said, oh yeah, what do you want next? Space for horse carriages? It was a tough campaign. And now we have this great access point. So it's wonderful that the DOT takes credit for this, because one would hope that lesson would then carry over with all of our other bridges as they are looked at, renovated when we need new bridges. Unfortunately, that lesson did not seem to stick. And so Charleston Moves became a full-blown incorporated advocacy organization in 2005, and we got our first full-time paid staff member in 2014. So we're still relatively new, but we've been at it for a while with particular focus on bridges after the success of the Ravenel. And one of the other elements that Charleston Moves rallied around pretty early on is our Battery to Beach plan, which is a vision to be able to walk or bike safely from, and it's about 32 miles, walk or bike safely all the way from Folly Beach, going through the municipalities, taking you through downtown, and then out to Sullivan's and Isle of Palms. Believe it or not, I had an intern go out and see how far we were as far as progress with that route. If you look at the just very, very basic infrastructure, so it might just be a sidewalk and it might not be anything more than a sidewalk, but very basic access. The route is actually 40% complete, which was shocking to me. I thought he was going to come back with 10%, so I was kind of blown away by that. But that is an overarching vision that we are constantly adding to, reworking. We need to get North Charleston connected to that. It's a baseline for where we should be. So one of the things, and I think probably you all are aware, but in case you're not, the Ashley River Bridge access for people who are biking and walking, that issue. We learned relatively recently that that's actually been a debate in the community for about a century. The wonderful historian at the Charleston County Public Library pulled some old News and Courier headlines showing that pretty much as soon as those bridges were built, people wanted to know why they couldn't walk or bike over them. And that has been a common theme and really came to a head in the 70s. And then again in the 80s, and then again in 2010. And throughout that entire process, and Donna Jacobs is here, and she does a wonderful job of mapping out the histories of a lot of things in Charleston. And she has this great collection of the process of citizens wanting to understand why they couldn't have that access and what they worked on to get it. So things really, they really came to a head around 2010 when the proposal that was settled on was converting the fourth lane on the existing Legree Bridge, which is the one that goes from West Ashley to downtown, converting that for bikeped use. And you all probably watched that play out. Many of you might have been involved in it. It didn't go well, that proposal. I'll just leave it at that. People got very angry. We tracked it. We went through, we submitted Freedom of Information Act requests and got all of the communications between elected officials, citizens, and municipal staff so that we could see what was going on. And then we mapped out the constituent comments, whether they were for or against this proposal. So we have all of the data on if you reached out to your city or county council member about this project, whether it was for or against, we have that mapped. So we were able to see that the vast majority of people who were contacting their elected officials wanted this lane converted. But what was interesting to note was certain council members who are no longer in office, they didn't win their races, would tell people who were reaching out to them to say, their own constituents who would say, we really want to be able to walk and bike and use this lane. They would say, oh, you're the only one who's told me that. And maybe you all reached out to a council member and got that response. You were not the only one. The vast majority were emailed. So it got political and it shouldn't have, but it did. So we sat down, we kind of looked at each other and we said, we're doing all this fighting over the Ashley River Bridge, but it's not the only unsafe Ashley River crossing that's out there. What we need is a package, and we need this package to be endorsed so that we're focusing on the James Island Connector and the Wapu Cut Bridge, even though it's not technically the Ashley River, but it's associated with the James Island Connector, the Ashley River Bridge itself, and then the North Bridge to Cosgrove. All of those need to be safe and connected for people walking and biking. So we have been working on that approach for a few years now. We've got a lot of signatures on our petition for all of those bridges to be addressed. And if you haven't signed it, I've got a copy up here that you can sign. Obviously, what I'm going to talk about is part of that has we've made a major milestone with the Ashley River Bridge and funding it, but we have a lot of interest in all of these other bridges. And so we want to make sure we keep that in mind. This funding for the Ashley River Bridge is a huge, huge victory, but we're not even close to done yet. We have a lot of work to do. So you might have seen these renderings floating around places, and these aren't the best. This one gives you a good sense of sort of what the vision is, and this would be a separate bike and pedestrian path bridge over the Ashley River, and it would be just south of the existing Legree Bridge. And it would tie in to both the intersection of B Street when you hit downtown, but then also it's got to tie into 35 Folly, the apartments with the green space right behind. And the city was smart, and they own that green space. So the bridge touching down, and that they've got control over that, which is great. So you can see it's in these renderings, it is as low as the existing bridge. But these were renderings sort of to get a sense of cost estimates for grant applications and for advocacy work. We don't know if the end result will actually look like this. It's been mentioned to me from some city staff that they are also looking at a fixed span bridge, so it wouldn't be, it might not be a drawbridge. And the drawbridge of a bridge is the most expensive part to build and to maintain. So that could affect how this goes. But for now, based on the cost estimates of a drawbridge solely for the use of people on bikes and on foot, and when I say on foot, that includes wheelchairs, motorized wheelchairs, just to be very clear about that. We've had questions about that. The cost was a little over $22 million. So the local match had to be secured first before we then applied for a federal grant. We did that. We applied for the federal grant 3 times. The local match already secured. So if you read in the news or you read any letters to the editor or anything like that where they say, oh, they still have to get money from the county, that's not true. We've got $3 million from the county, $1.5 million from the city, and a couple $100,000 from MUSC. They filled that gap. And then the federal side, we did finally get the grant the 3rd time through, which was just this past year. And so they are providing the 18 and change to make this happen. So as of right now, based on this, we have the funding to go ahead and do this. The city still needs to work out. They have some contracts they have to sign with the federal government. And so we have been, I'm paraphrasing, but basically we're not supposed to bug them until they've signed those contracts in February, early February. Once that happens, Charleston Moves will go back to being super obnoxious and bothering them and asking questions and figuring out what our role is in all of this, because there are very specific questions around who's actually in charge of this project, who will own the bridge, who will maintain the bridge. And all of those things need to be sussed out in order to get the best product. The other thing is the federal grant that is funding this is a BUILD grant, that's the acronym, and it is intended to be a quickly moving grant. So projects are supposed to be shovel ready or close to shovel ready, which means the city's got to move fast. This thing has to be ready to go within 3 years. So I'm smiling because I'm like, good, make it. Let's do this. And that's just a photo. The mayor had a press conference, and you can see. It's hard to see in that, but Representative Cunningham is in there. Senator Graham and Senator Scott's staff are in there, because what it took to get this federal grant finally approved was intense. On paper, the application itself was great. It was a no-brainer of a project. The benefit to the public was through the roof as far as environmental, as far as equity, as far as the fact that we're facing sea level rise. A project solely for the use of people on bikes and on foot is absolutely a climate crisis mitigator. So there was a lot working in favor. In addition, the economic benefit, and specifically the access for people who would be commuting to work to MUSC and in the hospital district, y'all were a big factor in this grant. And it made it look really compelling, and it is really compelling. The problem is this grant is political. So the final decider on who gets these types of grants is the Secretary of the USDOT, which is currently Secretary Elaine Chao. And she was known for really focusing on her home state of Kentucky with these grants. So we had to make sure that all of South Carolina's delegation pertaining to the Charleston area was not only on board, but actively lobbying Secretary Chao to fund this. So Charleston Moves has a staff of 2. The other staff member, her name is Savannah. So Savannah and I spent last year crashing political events and shoving renderings in our elected officials' faces. And then all of you did an amazing job of calling, submitting emails, letters, whatever you could do. We know based on our communication system that over 2,000 calls and emails went into Graham, Scott, Clyburn, and Cunningham from the public in support of this. And all of that pushed this over the edge. I'm sure some of them were just sort of like, okay, I will support it, get out of my face, which is fine because they supported it. So all of that is to say that without the public weighing in and helping to advocate for these things, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere on this. So it's really important that the public continue to be engaged on everything going on when we're fighting to get access for any other type of mode besides a car. Cars are always included, which is fine, but other modes of transit have to be included as well, and we need you all. And the public stepped up, which was amazing. But as I said, we still have to get the bridge built, and then we still have other bridges that we have to address. So the North Bridge to Cosgrove, if you're not familiar, it connects West Ashley and North Charleston. And we have started to focus pretty heavily on it, mainly because it's the most, people have been killed on it. It's one of the bridges that we hear the most about from people, especially when you think about we are supposed to be a world-class city and we are allowing people to travel in a way that is unsafe. And the typical person who's biking over the North Bridge is not doing it for fun. I've never seen a person bike over the North Bridge having a great time. They're doing this out of desperation. This is their means of transit. They need to get to where they're going, and this is the choice that they've had to make. And so we, each year, May is National Bike Month. We've changed it to Mobility Month in Charleston because it's not just about bikes. And so this year, or last year's Ride of Silence, which is a national annual ride where you ride literally in silence to honor people who have been killed or injured while biking or walking. We went over the North Bridge. We had the most people participate that we've ever had. It was over 200 people. We did have a police escort. We wouldn't have done that bridge without that. But what was also really interesting about it was I was geared up for, you can see all the motorists in that photo. And you can also just see the state of it. That median, in quotes, with the bollards in it, that's where people are biking right now in that. So there's not room for that. So people are either walking and carrying their bikes or they've got one foot in the lane of traffic. It's not a good situation. And I expected for this ride that we would have motorists yelling at us and throwing stuff at us and just being generally annoyed with us. That didn't happen at all. People were very respectful. They looked kind of curious, like, what are these people doing riding this bridge? So that, coupled with the participation, and then adding on every conversation we have had with an elected official about this bridge, the response has been immediately, yeah, we got to do something about that. What should we do about that? How do we do that quickly? So we have had no opposition so far on that bridge. And we have lost at least 2 citizens there in the past few years. That is a ghost bike right when you get off and head towards Azalea. I don't, if any of you knew Jay Bellamy, that's his ghost bike right there. He's still, the person who hit him and drove away still hasn't been found. And then we've got the Wapu Cut Bridge to James Island, which is a bridge we've got to address because if you're gonna come from James Island and then go over this new wonderful Ashley River Bridge, you still have to contend with the Wapu Cut Bridge. And as you can see, this is the only real decent photo we have of the Wapukat Bridge is pulled from the Post and Courier. And you can see there's not enough room. She's got her bike tilted. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to walk or bike that thing. Yeah, you have, Vicki. I experimented with it, and I'm pretty brazen about where I'll ride, but I won't do that one again until it's better. So what we've been looking at with that bridge is we've got the Rethink Folly Road Steering Committee based on the Rethink Folly plan that was passed several years ago, looking at the Folly Road corridor, how to make it safe and connected for people biking, walking, and taking public transit. Also looking at the stormwater situation that goes on Folly in certain intersections, looking at really what wetlands are along the road, looking at what type of buffer gardens and other things that we can have that would absorb some of that in a natural way, not throwing things out there that are going to cause more problems, things like pervious pavement. It's an overarching view of Folly Road. It's not just specific to transportation. And it includes the Wapukat Bridge. So one of our goals this year is to get, because the Wapukat Bridge has not ever been studied for any reason, whether it's replacement or anything else, we need to get started on that. So I'm hoping through the Folly Steering Committee we can get going on that and get some money allocated for a study. And then the James Island Connector, which I don't know if you all remember this. I took this photo of the bike that was spray painted out the side after Dr. Holland was killed riding his bike on the connector. And it's just, you'd think it'd be a real easy fix to make the connector safer for cyclists. It's not, because of the slope of the hills on it, it wouldn't be accessible to everybody. DOT would never allow pedestrians on it. But there are ways that we can make it a little safer for people who are confident cyclists. We have the price tag for what DOT might allow to do that, and it's $5 million. So it's been sort of pushed to the side a little bit by the city because they felt like there are other routes that they could get more bang for the buck on. But we're not going to let that go. And I was looking at federal grants yesterday to figure out what might qualify James Island Connector for some of that money. So the other aspects of all of this are there are key intersections related to the Ashley River Bridge that would also need to be upgraded in order to get people to and from the new Bikeped Bridge safely. So if we want people to use the bridge, they have to be able to get there. So that funding allocation was also included in the grant that was allocated from the feds. So this is where the West Ashley Bikeway, which has been renamed the Maryville Bikeway, if you did not know that was a recent name change. How many of y'all are familiar with the Bikeway? Most of you, okay. So this is not the Greenway, it's separate, but it does end up it could meet up with the Greenway if there was a safe connection at Wapu Road over in West Ashley. But this is St. Andrews Boulevard. And you basically kind of pop out on the Bikeway. If you're coming from sort of middle West Ashley, you pop out and then there's no place for you to go. There's nothing for you as a cyclist. You have to hop the curb and get in a subpar bike lane. That's your option. So then meanwhile, you've got the neighborhoods, formerly a town, of Maryville and Ashleyville that have been bisected by this road. And the towns of Maryville and Ashleyville, that existed way before the road did. So the other element of all of this is looking at where roads and highways are placed. And it's typically in lower income African-American communities. These roads get shoved through right there. So this bisected an existing town, one of the very first African-American settlement communities in our state. And now we have these high-speed vehicles coming through. So then you've got the old rail easement that's now a biking and walking path that is separated by this speedway. So we've been working with the city to get a better crossing put in there. And it's, again, become strangely political. So we had it allocated, the funding to do this rendering that's up here. Then some things happened back and forth that sort of chipped away at the design. And then County Council got a little funny about funding it. So we sat down and worked with them. They voted to keep the funding with it. And then we found out last week that they are quietly shifting the money away from it without a public vote, FYI. So we are going to be doing a walkthrough of this area with some key elected officials and neighborhood folks to show them what's going on out there and why these games that they're playing with this crossing, it's not going to work for folks, especially folks who live nearby in the neighborhood who are just trying to cross to get over. The nearest grocery store now is Harris Teeter, which you have to cross this, and then you have to cross Savannah Highway, and it's not great. So that is related to the bike and pedestrian bridge, but we've also got the intersections that are funded to help get people to that new bridge, which is where Folly and the West Ashley Greenway intersect over near Earth Fair. That some of you may know, may not know, the Greenway continues on after you go over that intersection of Folly Road, and you just can't, it's just difficult to get to. So that intersection is going to get addressed with the build grant, with the Ash River Bridge being built. And then the intersection downtown of B and Lockwood is also going to be addressed so that everybody can get to and from this bridge safely. And then I don't want to keep babbling on because I will do that if you let me. But we are working, as I mentioned earlier, we work county-wide. And so the first goal is to make sure that what we want to see is getting in these official plans so that we don't have to run and chase after everyone all the time when a project opportunity comes up. If it's already in an official plan, then it should be incorporated in what needs to happen. So one of those is the downtown bike plan, which is called People Pedal. That was officially formally passed and included in the city's transportation plan and passed by city council. And I've got little cards up here if you're interested in looking at what that part of the plan looks like. It's a basic upgrade on the peninsula, but connecting to the Ravenel Bridge and the new Ashley River Bridge. Basically, the easiest routes to upgrade east, west, north, south for a bike network. And it was based on thousands of people giving their input, what's interesting about that to me is we got more people to weigh in on this plan than who typically votes in a city council election. We have a lot of council members who got in with less votes than the number who participated in this plan. So people want this. So as part of the People Pedal plan, Line Street was converted to two-way with shared use arrows that are strategically placed in the center of the lane to indicate that bikes are supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be shoved off to the side where you can then get nailed by a side view mirror or whatever by a driver. So when you're on a bike or when you're driving and you see these shared use arrows in the center of the lane, it means everybody needs to respect each other, both sides. We also got some raised crosswalks online as well. And we've been working on the intersection of Brigade and Meeting. That, if you're familiar with that intersection, I think the number is 23 car collisions have occurred there in 3 years. So, and a few of those, I think, went into some of the houses right there. So it's a dangerous intersection, and then you have a lot of people on bike and on foot. So the result is that, and these plans were presented to the neighborhood this past weekend. We've been working on this for years. Fingers crossed, if all gets approved, this would be the first protected bike lane in the city of Charleston that would go in on Brigade Street. It would connect to the future low line, but it also, the reason why we focused in on this is it connects to Bridgeview Village Apartments, which is low-income housing that is sort of shoved off to one side of the peninsula, and small children are currently biking and crossing over Morrison and Meeting to get to King Street, to get to the Food Lion on King Street. So we're hoping if we can get this in place, that'll give the kids a space to actually safely be instead of this very dangerous intersection and very dangerous space. And then we've also been participating. The Department of Transportation is required to do some safety audits throughout the state. Our bicycle and pedestrian fatality rates are so high in South Carolina, and particularly in Charleston County, that the federal government has told South Carolina, if you do not start spending money on this, then we're going to make you spend more money on this. So they have allocated $5 million statewide, which is not a lot of money, but it's more than they have, to do these road safety audits of the top 10 most dangerous corridors in the state. Charleston County has 5 of those. So last year we did meeting and King Streets with the DOT and the city, and identified all the ways that those streets could be improved for people walking and biking. It all goes into the report. Whether it gets done is another question, but at least we've got this report that we can then advocate from. And then yesterday we finished up Ashley Phosphate, which is, I believe it's the #1 most dangerous corridor in the state. And the number of people who are walking and biking Ashley Phosphate it's unreal. And one of the things that's interesting when you sit in these meetings with agency staff, they look at the data and they see, okay, we had 6 pedestrians get killed at this intersection. And then you look at what's identified as the contributing factors, and it's things like crossed illegally. And all the agency folks look at each other and they say, well, they crossed illegally, that's why they got hit. Then you go out there and you do the actual audit and you see the signal to use the crosswalk isn't working. So why would you go all the way down when you're carrying groceries to a crosswalk that doesn't even work? Well, what would be the purpose of adding that stress to your life if you're already walking Ashley Phosphate? You can see the crosswalk stripes. There's not a ladder stripe, so you can't even see it at night. It's not a high visibility crosswalk, so it doesn't show up at night. The crosswalk button, as I said, doesn't work. And then the road itself is so wide that you have to wonder how much time does that signal, when it works, how much time does it give them? So of course and then you look at where the bus stops are, and people are running to catch the bus mid-block. So there's a lot of reasons why people are not in a crosswalk. And so these audits are sort of playing out as a way for the agency to get real data as they're going out and seeing this with the advocates and with the city officials who are involved. So it's been a very interesting process to watch DOT engineers sort of take a step back and realize you have to plan for people. You can't plan for high-moving vehicles all the time. Also, one more thing, and it's up here if you want to use it. We have a close calls database that we have started. If you have an experience while you're walking or biking that is scary, where you're nearly hit but you aren't. I don't know if you have ever experienced that, where you're nearly hit and you think, well, I don't want to call the police because I was nearly hit, but you're super upset and you realize the driver was behaving in an unsafe manner. You don't know what to do. Fill out our form on our database, and then every few months we take those submissions and we download them into a Google map and we hand it off to the relevant police departments for them to use so that they can see hot spots of where this stuff is happening and either send out officers for enforcement to sort of watch, or it helps us identify where there are areas where maybe we need to advocate for better infrastructure. And we've also just recently added to the list of entities who gets that map. The MUSC public safety chief asked for this as well. So, and then finally, and then I really will be quiet, we are going to do some bike and pedestrian counts on the campus at key intersections along Courtenay, because there's been a lot of issues at certain intersections on Courtenay. One of our board members was actually hit while biking, and she was in a wheelchair for a little bit, but she recovered. She's kind of amazing. She recovered disturbingly fast. But, it was a situation where the motorist probably shouldn't have been behind the wheel of the car. So, the cyclist was doing everything right and still got hit and very, very seriously injured. So that is one example, but we've been seeing a lot of stuff play out in the middle of the medical district, and we'd like to get a sense of what those numbers are while we're out. And then when we get that information, we're able to hand that off and really leverage getting better infrastructure An example of that being what we did on Maybank Highway on James Island. Last year, a seventh person was hit along that segment of Maybank between Poorhouse and Public House, which triggered some DOT concern. So we went out there with the agency and we walked it, and we all assessed what was going on. And then Charleston Moves and volunteers went out and actually counted on certain days where people were crossing and how many. And we realized over the course of about 3 hours, 666 people crossing at that one segment over the course of 3 hours. When we handed that data off to the agencies in the county, they were kind of blown away by that. They didn't realize how many people were out there. So we were able to get leverage funding for a mid-block crossing over there, which is something DOT rarely approves. And now we're using that to apply for grant funding to do more along Maybank Highway. So these counts are sort of the start of how we're able to then leverage and get infrastructure places and kind of poke whatever agency official we need to and say, you know, got 600 people who sure would appreciate being able to not get hit while crossing the street. So I'll stop, but yeah, we've got all this stuff up here, and I'm happy to take any questions, or if I can fill you in on stuff you're wondering about the Ash River Bridge.